and welcome to another video, and welcome to a wrap up of the books that I read in January. I mentioned in my last video that I had intended for January to be a reading vlog where I would film some footage of me doing fun things and then update you along the way about books that I'd read. And I managed to get halfway through the month, filming a few things and then talking about some books, and then I got ill, and when I was reading again afterwards, I didn't have the energy to film after I'd read. So anyway, this is just a wrap up of books. There is no vlog footage here. I might try it again in future months, but we'll just have to see how that goes. So I read 7 books in January. I am filming this on the last day of January, but there is no way I'm going to finish a book today. So I think that's it for the month. My plan for 2026 is to try and reduce the number of unread books on my shelf. As of the 1st of January, I have 120 unread books on my shelf, or shelves rather. They don't all fit on one shelf. And I know lots of people would be happy with that. I'm not too bothered. I don't mind having unread books on my shelves, but there's just a lot on there and I want to kind of reduce it a little bit. So I thought I'd challenge myself. It's one of the reasons I'm doing the TBR reading spa, to try and just promote myself. No, that's not the right word. Push myself, there we go, into reading more of my own books. So I read 7 books and 6 of those were books off my shelf. So I'm quite happy about that. I think that's quite good odds. Only one of them was an audiobook from the library. I think February probably won't include as many books from my shelves, probably not, because I will be probably reading more books for the Women's Prize for Non-Fiction. But anyway, I read 6 books, so we're down to 114, and that's quite nice. So I thought I would just tell you about some of the books that I read in January. This should be relatively quite quick because some of them I don't have a huge amount to say. The library book was Death of an Ordinary Man by Sarah Perry, and I've already spoken about this in my predictions video for the Women's Prize. But this book is a really beautiful non-fiction book about Sarah Perry's father-in-law, David. And she had known him a very, very long time, and then he found out, he got ill and then found out that he had terminal cancer, and then within a few weeks had passed away. And this book is really about her and her husband coming to terms with this, her father-in-law coming to terms with this, and the way that illness took him very, very quickly, and then just the process of dying. I thought when I first heard about the book and first decided I wanted to read it, that it was going to be more about his life. I didn't really understand that it was literally what the title says is about his death, and I found that personally very cathartic to read, for a variety of reasons. But it was really moving, very, very effective. It spoke a lot about the different people that are involved in diagnosing someone's death and then in palliative care, and I found it very moving and just very beautifully written. Sarah Perry's a great writer, and The Essex Serpent, I think, is one of her books, and I've read that before. And it's just a really beautiful book. I'm very, very glad that I read it. I really loved it. And the other books that I read, let me just, grab a pile. Here they are. Here's all the books I read. Let's go through them. So the first one was a book that I read for the Read Good Challenge, which for January was to read a book with food in the title or food on the cover. Or food in the title, I can't remember, but I went for this one, which is Food for the Dead. So I took this very literally, and it's both got a cutlery on the front and it says the word food. But this is a poetry collection by Charlotte Shevchenko Knight, and it's published by Cape Poetry. This is a book which is quite difficult to define. It is a book about hunger, and it's a book about food. So Charlotte is a British Ukrainian poet, and this is mostly, I'd say, about the Holodomor, which was a self-imposed famine, and it's self-imposed by Stalin on the Ukrainian people, and it's about the longevity of that famine, of the legacy that has on people, and the way that they approach food, the way that her grandmother and her mother approaches food, and her own attitude towards food. A lot of it is about eating disorder and what's the word I'm looking for? Not negative approaches to food, disordered eating, sorry, that's the phrase. So whether it's a specific eating disorder or it's just disordered in some way, there's a very subtle distinction, which obviously this book doesn't talk about that because it's a poetry collection, but it does kind of look at all of those different things. It's a very, very moving collection. It's very effective. personally, I didn't connect with a huge number of the poems because I have a very specific type of poetry that I like. And some of the style I felt got a little bit repetitive. That's a very just personal thing. I thought this was really, really interesting. I know lots of people who read poetry, watch my channel, and I would recommend this book to you all. I thought it was really, really great. I thought it grappled with ideas of history and legacy and memory very, very well, and I would really recommend it. So I read that for the Read Good challenge, so tick. I then read some books for the TBR Reading Spot, and I was looking at books that were kind of the most recently added. So it was like the newest books to you, or the newest books to have been released. And anyway, I read kind of one of the newest books that I bought on my shelf, which is this book, Ellmann's Joyce, The Biography of a Masterpiece and Its Maker by Zachary Leader. I don't really have a huge amount to say about this. I did read this for my PhD, but this wasn't actually what I thought it was going to be. So it ended up being not very useful. But this is about Richard Ellmann's biography of James Joyce. So it's a very meta biography of a biography. I did tab a few things. It was a vaguely relevant, but I'd say that half of this book is a biography of Richard Ellmann before we even get to him writing about James Joyce. And I wanted more about the process of writing a biography. So that's why I was reading it. So if you're going into it thinking that might be what it is more about Richard Ellmann, which was fascinating. So Richard Ellmann, other than the biography that he wrote of Joyce, also wrote what's considered by many people to be the important, the definitive biography of Oscar Wilde. I wouldn't quite put it that way, but it's considered by lots of people to be that. And he was also the father of Lucy Ellmann, who was she longlisted for the Booker? Anyway, she wrote Ducks Newburyport, which I'm pretty sure was nominated for awards, and it's a very chunky book. But that's who Richard Ellmann is, and no one's written about his life before. No one really talks about his life very, very much. There were interesting parts of this biography, but I found that because it wasn't quite what I thought it was and I needed, I found myself kind of skimming over some parts of it and maybe not being as engaged with it as I would have been if I was actually reading it because I wanted to. But it's good. So if you're interested in James Joyce, or if you're interested in literary biography, I think this is very, very well written and really, really great book. So I would recommend it for that reason. The next thing I read for the TBR Reading Spot was a newest release on my TBR, and I decided to go for something which was not yet out. So this is a book which is out in February, and I would really like to recommend to everyone. And this is Paper Sisters by Rachel Canwell. So the author sent me this proof copy of the book because I heard about it on Instagram, and it's just like, it's a book about women, three sisters during the First World War, and I'm slightly obsessed with anything written about or during the First World War. So I really wanted to read it. And this is about, they live in Lincolnshire, and they live in kind of in marshland. And this is a very kind of, it's based on a true story. And there is this family who lived on like one side of the river and the rest of the town lives on the other side. And they take care of I nearly said hotel, a hospital, which was built for the local dockyards. But the hospital was never used because the actual docks, which is not the right word, I can't remember the word I'm looking for, but anyway, there was an accident, it collapsed. The hospital was therefore never used, but they still are paid to maintain and keep up the hospital. Which is kind of the premise of this story. So you've got Eleanor, who lives in the house. Her parents have now died, and she lives in the house with her sister Lily. Now, Lily is very emotionally fragile, doesn't like to go out, is kind of cared for by Eleanor. And Eleanor is in love with John and very much would like to marry John and move away. And so they live in this house together, and Eleanor does most of the kind of upkeep of the hospital. And Clara is the wife, so this is kind of the third sister of this story. She is the wife of, I've forgotten his name. He's a terrible human being, like really, really awful. Frank, that was his name. So Frank is the brother of Eleanor and Lily, these two sisters, and their other brother died in an accident, and this is what has caused quite a lot of trauma in the family. And Frank drinks, he's very violent, he's an awful, awful person to Clara, just like the absolute worst. And there's a lot of tension there. Like, all of them are kind of people who are quite angry. And I thought that Rachel Canwell did a really, really good job of demonstrating how these different people, so you've got these three sisters, or two sisters and their sister-in-law and their brother Frank. John, bless him, I'm not going to say he's a two-dimensional character, but because he does have some depth, but he's really there to serve a purpose. But the rest of them are very, very complex people. And I found myself getting angry at the way that they behaved, because they were angry and they didn't quite know how to deal with it. And then I realised that that's why it's actually very well written, because I was getting angry. So I feel like if I'm starting to feel emotion towards these characters and the way that they're behaving, they probably seem quite realistic. And they definitely do. I think it's very, very complex. I don't think it was a perfect novel. There were bits of it that I just kind of thought, oh, I see what you're doing here, and I see why this character has been put here. There are a few things that I think maybe it stuck too close to the reality of the kind of a story that it's based on, or what happened at the time. And some of those elements almost didn't seem realistic, even though they were, which I know sounds really odd, but I felt like, oh, you could have just left that bit out, or you could have written something different. But so it wasn't perfect for me. But actually, I think Rachel Canwell, this is her debut novel, and it's published by Northodox Press, who are an independent publisher in the UK, who publish fiction by people from the north of England, or set in the north of England. I think you have to also be from the north of England, but this one is set in the north as well. And I just think she's a great writer. I think it was very atmospheric. I got inside the heads of these characters. I didn't really like any of them. I thought they were all terrible people. Well, not terrible, actually. Flawed people, shall we say. But I found it really engaging, and it was really page-turning. Like, I wanted to keep reading. I wanted to find out what happened to these people, and I wanted to find out what terrible thing was going to happen next. The descriptions of the place they were in and the time period they were in. I read a lot of fiction, either written during the First World War or set in the First World War. And the war does happen, and there were a few things I thought were quite predictable to do with the war. But nevertheless, even though it's a little predictable, I still kind of enjoyed the ride. But as I was saying, I read a lot of fiction around this time, and I thought that this was one of the kind of the best that I've read recently for scene setting and just kind of that atmosphere of the war and the tension. And I love stories about people left behind who don't go to war. I think those stories are really, really interesting. And those kind of little niggles that I had with bits of the story, entirely personal, because I'm always really critical about stories written in the First World War, but I really like this, and I really think that more people, well, I was going to say more people should be talking about it. It hasn't even come out yet. It's out in February, but I would like to see more people read this. That's what I was going to say. And if you do get round to it, make sure you let me know what you thought of it. But just a really great, if you want like a historical fiction that's got complex characters and it's just page turning, like really, really good, kind of easy read. I don't want that to sound insulting. I always think it does. I don't know why, but yeah, just like quite easy to read, and just, yeah, I just really enjoyed it, actually. This was probably one of the, was it the most successful? No, it wasn't the most successful. I'm looking down at the three others that I have to tell you about. Wasn't the most successful book of the month for me, but very, very close second, I think. Very close second. Okay, then I'm going to tell you about this, which is Maggie O'Farrell's After You'd Gone. I obviously love Hamnet because it's brilliant. And I then read The Marriage Portrait, which, except for the ending, I loved. Maggie O'Farrell's writing, I think, is absolutely brilliant. I disliked the ending a great deal, and it did. The endings don't often taint a book for me. If I don't like the ending, I can kind of forget that it happened. But the ending of The Marriage Portrait, couldn't get on board with that. But after reading those two, I decided I want to do a typical Jen thing, which is to read all of an author's books in publication order. So I decided to go back and find Maggie O'Farrell's first novel, which is this one. I found this in a second-hand shop. I won't be keeping this novel, which might be an indication of what I felt about it, but I tend to only keep books that are 5-star. But this is about a young woman whose name is Alice, and she's from Scotland. She's living in London, and then the premise of the book, and it's on the back of the book, so this is not a spoiler, is that she goes to London, she gets the train from London to Edinburgh. She meets her sisters there. She sees something which traumatises her, or something happens, and then she immediately gets on the train back to London. And then now the fact that she did this in a day, I'm like, this is set in the early 2000s. The trains were not that quick. but we'll brush that aside for a second. It's a minor point. She gets back to London and then steps out in front of a moving car and is in a coma. Now that is the whole premise of the story, so that's not a kind of surprise. But I guess the thing that Maggie O'Farrell is going for here is this: why did she do it? You know, why? What did she see that scared her so much, or traumatized her, or whatever? You know, what has happened in her life? And that, I think, is the hook that she tries to get you to keep reading with. Now, I was very much couldn't put this book down. That was the kind of feeling I got from this book. It's one of those, quite like Paper Sisters, in fact, where I read it so quickly because I didn't want to stop reading. But most of that was because of Maggie O'Farrell's writing, because I think she's absolutely just a brilliant writer. But the kind of twist of what it is, I guessed very early on, and I'm not the kind of person that reads a book and tries to kind of second guess what the twist is, or is there going to be a twist or anything like that. I just guessed it. It was just really obvious, I thought. And the main character, Alice, I'll try and say this without spoilers. So she has a number of relationships throughout the book that are just quite toxic, and even some situations that aren't anything to do with her. Just like she's suffering, like at one point in the book, something, you know, quite negative to her mental health has happened. And then she's gone for a swim and some guy just comes along and he's like, hey, I see you in here a lot. It's like, why are you chatting to her? You horrible, horrible man. Just no, why are you chatting someone up in a swimming pool? So even when it's like she's just minding her own business, there are still these like terrible people around her, terrible men trying to kind of get her attention. Anyway, there is a love interest in this book, which I think you're supposed to root for. And I think that that's, again, another hook for the story to make it really good, is that you're supposed to root for this relationship and really feel the importance of it. However, I hated the guy in this relationship. I'm trying not to do this with any spoilers, so I won't even say his name. But I hated him so much. I thought he was quite creepy. Like the way that he just was like, when they went to the Lake District, if you read it, you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't get it. I just thought he was a bit creepy, and I thought we were going to have another story about a terrible man. And then it turns out he was the one we were supposed to root for. I just found it really confusing, and I just thought he was a bit icky. And the whole relationship was a bit icky. Now, this book, I think it was released in 2001. 2000 it was first published. And there's something about that I thought, oh, that's really interesting, because I think this is very much of its time period. I think there's a certain way, certainly in the media, that women were expected to behave towards men, and some of the things that men did we were supposed to kind of put up with, and we did. And times have changed, so I'm very much reading this with the hat on of someone 25 years later after this book was first written, 26 now. So 26 years later, I don't think this book landed very well. Like, I don't think it's aged very well in terms of some of the things that we're supposed to like and some of the things we're supposed to dislike. And I don't know, if you've read this recently, I would love to know your thoughts, because I feel like if I'd read this in the year 2000, I probably would have given this 5 stars. It was very, very page-turning, gripping, you know, kind of wanting to know what's going on. But I think for me, most of the selling point was Maggie O'Farrell's writing. The actual plot, not so much. But I'm still going to continue reading her books because I just think she's absolutely fantastic. But if you've read this like very recently, I'd love to know your thoughts. Maybe it's just me. But that guy, I just couldn't. So the last 2 books I have to tell you about are 2 of the smallest books on my TBR. No more, because I've read them. They're no longer on my TBR. So we had a day off, my wife and we sat, my armchair is here. I normally film from this armchair, but I'm trying to get more daylight, so I'm sat on the floor. And Mary was sat on the sofa, and she has a humongous pile of library books. I can see them teetering over there. It's like almost the same height as the sofa. So she said, I'm going to do like try a chapter. I'm going to start these books and try a chapter of each. And some of them are fiction and some of them are non-fiction. And she said, I'm going to work my way through and see if I can send any of them back. And I said, oh, good idea. I'm not going to do a try a chapter because I feel like I want to try all of the books on my shelves anyway. But I will just start the smallest books on my shelf. So I have 2 very, very small books here. I did maybe think that I might read more books because I just pulled off all the really short books on my shelves. But I only ended up going through 2 because apparently I can't read that quickly. But Mary also didn't do try a chapter. She just started reading 1 book. Oh, which book was it? I can't remember. Something to do with Tudor history, but she started reading it. and then just read the whole book. So I feel like we both failed that day. But anyway, I read 2 books. The other really short books on my shelves, I think I'm going to save for a holiday, which we are going on next weekend, which I'm very excited about because I don't go on holiday very often. So can you tell? I'm very excited. And also, spoilers, it's to the same place I went last year, which is like a cottage in the middle of nowhere. There's going to be a log fire. We're not doing anything for 3 days. Oh, I'm so excited. Anyway, so the books that I read were A Long Winter by Toibin. This is a book that I bought towards the end of last year. I saw it on a bookshop's website. It's a bookshop called Foxline Books, who I'll drop a link below to their website. They do a lot of signed books, and you can see Toibin's tiny little signature there. And I saw this and I thought, oh, a new Toibin. I didn't know he had a new book coming out, and I got very excited and immediately purchased it. And then instantly regretted my life choices when it arrived, and I was like, this is tiny. This real size book is physically tiny. It's also, how many pages is it? Anyway, this book is like 130 pages. And then I found out that not only is it, well, it's not really a short story because it's too long. I think it's a novella, but it's also been previously published a long time ago. I hadn't previously read it, but it has been previously published. So I definitely fell for the marketing. Well done, Jen. But it's Toibin, so obviously. I was kind of intending to read this. Well, actually, I was intending to read some Toibin for the TBR reading spot of kind of reading a trusted author. I didn't get around to either of his 2 actual novels, but I did read his novella. So I feel like that still counts, I think. So this book, this is a difficult book. So this is set in the Pyrenees, and it's set in winter, and you've got a husband and wife and 2 sons. One of the sons goes off to do military service. The other one has already done it, and he's kind of back home. And the mum has some difficulties, and she just gets up one day and leaves, and they have no idea what's happened to her. I thought that the book going into it was going to be more about them kind of dealing with the fact that she'd gone, because I thought she just went away to live somewhere else. No. They spend most of the book looking for her, and it's quite traumatic actually, because she goes on like what turns out to be the worst day for like a blizzard coming in, and she just kind of sets off on foot into the mountains. And there is, like, in the blurb of the book, it does describe that there is a local boy which then comes to help on the farm that they live on, and that there's some kind of romantic interest with kind of the young man and this boy. And that's true. It's quite gay in places. I quite like it. Not gay enough. I felt like it could have been gayer. But I thought it was quite interesting. I thought the relationship between this dad who like doesn't really talk and doesn't really communicate, and this son who didn't really notice that his mum was having all these problems and that she was drinking a lot, and the dynamic between the father and son, I thought was quite interesting. I mean, it's only a novella. I could honestly have read an entire novel with this, and I felt like I needed more. It was perfect for what it was, and I really liked, I didn't like the ending, but because it's quite sad, but I kind of liked the way it ended, I think. And yeah, I just felt like I needed more. I wanted more. I could have read an entire novel. I mean, I could have read an entire epic, like 1,000-page novel where nothing really happens. There's nothing really does in this, and there's just lots of sitting around and thinking about the past and the future and thinking about their mum. And I just thought it was really interesting. It was very evocative. It was very like the descriptions of the landscape and the descriptions of just where they lived and the house still stay with me. So I think it was incredibly well written, as you'd expect from Toibin. But yeah, I just could have done with a little bit more. But if you want a nice short novella, I think this is a really, really good shout. And the last book I'm going to tell you about is a book that I bought. I think I bought this when we were on the booktuber meetup in Bath, and we went to Persephone. And again, I'm going to hold up a Persephone book, like you can tell which one it is. It's just great. But this is the Victorian Chaise-Longue by Marghanita Laski. And look at those end papers, aren't they lovely? Now, the thing that I love most, this is book number 6, by the way, of the Persephone collection. The thing that I love most about Persephone books is they don't have a blurb on the back. And even on the front flap, where it's got a little bit of information, that's actually just a quote from the book. And sometimes it gives you a hint of what the book might be about, but you just don't know. If you too also don't like to know anything about a book, I'll just tell you that this is a 5-star read and I love it. And is it my favourite Persephone ever? I don't think so, but it's definitely up there. Maybe this and Despised and Rejected have like an equal level of love in my heart, but it's definitely up there. So if you don't want to hear, and I'm not going to spoil it, but if you don't want to hear anything else, so long and thank you for watching. But this book, okay, so it's called The Victorian Chaise-Longue, and it starts with this young woman who has given birth to her child and hasn't been able to see them because she has TB, and the woman does not the child. And she has just been in bed for ages, and it starts off with her doctor and her husband being there, talking to her like she's a child, and I found it very annoying and just hated them. But they have basically given her permission to get up out of bed and to go and sit like in the drawing room. So like, well, you still need to rest though, and then you might be able to see your child. And the book is full of this longing that she has for wanting to see her child, which I thought was really beautifully represented in the book. But she goes, they say you can go sit somewhere in this room, and she says, well, I'll go to the Victorian Chaise-Longue because we got this in like a thrift shop, and it describes how she found it, but she'd never really sat on it. So she said, I'll be fine, I'll go in the Victorian Chaise-Longue. And because it's a Persephone book and sometimes they're quite ordinary and they describe very ordinary things in a really beautiful way, I thought, perhaps what this book is it's just her on the chaise-longue, just watching the world go by and seeing the things that happen and maybe interacting with, you know, her maid and her husband and the doctor. I thought that maybe that would be what it is. It is not. All I'll say is, okay, how can I, with no spoilers, again, turn off if you're not interested, but there's something slightly supernatural that happens when she sits on the chaise-longue. I found this book tense. I found it almost scary at times, like, but almost in a kind of like, you know, when someone's like in a completely helpless situation, and I found it like quite, it just made my skin crawl at times, and like my heart race, and I was a little bit like, oh my god, what's going to happen? And I think because I read it super quick, because I read it in a couple of hours and just really immersed myself in it, it's definitely the way to read this book. I just found it so completely absorbing and just so completely gripping and just icky, not icky, that's not the right word, unnerving, and just, I just loved it so much. It was so good. Anyway, it's called The Victorian Chaise-Longue, and all of the books that I mentioned, the list of the names and titles will be in the description box below, so if you want to go and find yourself a copy of this book, you can do. But it's so good. This book was so good. Okay, so that's the end. Those are the books that I read in January. I would love to know if you have read any of these, what you thought. If you've got any other recommendations based off this, you know, let's continue the love in the comments, and do let me know all of your thoughts on all of those things. And until next time, thank you so much for watching.